This is Purposive Communication, Lesson 1, and we are now proceeding with Communication Principles and Ethics. Communication is beyond simply putting words into thoughts and emotions. It is done effectively only when information is transmitted without changing both the content and the context of the message. Simply put, communication is the art of creating and sharing ideas for a specific purpose. It comes in many forms. Verbal communication, which includes the use of language, sounds, and tone of voice. Nonverbal communication, which includes body language and facial expressions. Written communication, such as through journals, emails, blogs, and text messages. Visual communication, which involves signs, symbols, pictures, graphics, and emojis. Verbal communication is one of the most common types, often used during presentations, video conferences, and phone calls, meetings, and one-on-one conversations. It is important because of its efficiency. It can be helpful to support verbal communication with both nonverbal and written communication. Here are a few steps you can take to develop your verbal communication skills. 1. Use a strong, confident speaking voice, especially when presenting information to a few or group of people. Be sure to use a strong voice so that everyone can easily hear you. Be confident when speaking so that your ideas are clear and easy for others to understand. 2. Use active listening. The other side of using verbal communication is intently listening to and hearing others. Active listening skills are key when conducting a meeting, presentation, or even when participating in a one-on-one conversation. Doing so will help you grow as a communicator. 3. Avoid filler words. It can be tempting, especially during a presentation, to use filler words such as like, so, or yeah. While it might feel natural after completing a sentence or pausing to collect your thoughts, it can also be distracting for your audience. Try presenting to a trusted friend or colleague who can call attention to the times you use filler words. Try to replace them by taking a breath when you are tempted to use them. Moving to nonverbal communication, which can be used both intentionally or unintentionally. For example, you might smile unintentionally when you hear a pleasing or enjoyable idea or piece of information. Nonverbal communication is helpful when trying to understand others' thoughts and feelings. If they are displaying close body language, such as closed arms or hunched shoulders, they might be feeling anxious, angry, or nervous. If they are displaying open body language, with both feet on the ground and arms by their side or on the table, they are likely feeling positive and open to information. Here are a few steps you can take to develop your nonverbal communication skills. 1. Notice how your emotions feel physically. Throughout the day, as you experience a range of emotions, anything from energized, bored, happy, or frustrated, try to identify where you feel that emotion within your body. For example, if you're feeling anxious, you might notice that your stomach feels tight. Developing self-awareness around how your emotions affect your body can give you greater mastery over your external presentation. 2. Be intentional about your nonverbal communication. Make an effort to display positive body language when you feel alert, open, and positive about your surroundings. You can also use body language to support your verbal communication if you feel confused or anxious about information, like using a furrowed brow. Use body language alongside verbal communication, such as asking follow-up questions or pulling the presenter aside to give feedback. 3. Mimic nonverbal communication you find effective. If you find certain facial expressions or body language beneficial to a certain setting, use it as a guide when improving your own nonverbal communication. For example, if you see that when someone nods their head, it communicates approval and positive feedback efficiently, use it in your next meeting when you have the same feelings. Written communication is the act of writing, typing, or printing symbols like letters and numbers to convey information. It is helpful because it provides a record of information for reference. Writing is commonly used to share information through books, pamphlets, blogs, letters, memos, and more. Emails and chats are a common form of written communication. And here are a few steps you can take to develop your written communication skills. 1. Strive for simplicity. Written communications should be as simple and clear as possible. While it might be helpful to include lots of details in instructional communications, for example, you should look for areas where you can write as clearly as possible for your audience to understand. 2. Don't rely on tone, because you do not have the nuance of verbal and nonverbal communications. Be careful when you are trying to communicate a certain tone when writing. For example, attempting to communicate a joke, sarcasm, or excitement might be translated differently depending on the audience. Instead, try to keep your writing as simple and plain as possible, and follow up with verbal communication where you can add more personality. 3. Take time to review your written communication. Setting time aside to reread your emails, letters, or memos can help you identify mistakes or opportunities to say something differently. For important communication or those that will be sent to a large number of people, it might be helpful to have a trusted colleague review it as well. Lastly, we have visual communication, which is the act of using photographs, art, drawings, sketches, charts, and graphs to convey information. Visuals are often used as an aid during presentations to provide helpful context alongside written and verbal communication. Because people have different learning styles, visual communication might be helpful for some to consume ideas and information. For you to develop your visual communication skills, the first thing that you should do is ask others before including visuals. If you are considering sharing a visual aid in your presentation or email, consider asking others for feedback. Adding visuals can sometimes make concepts confusing or muddled. Getting a third-party perspective can help decide whether the visual adds value to your communication. And consider your audience. Be sure to include visuals that are easily understood by your audience. For example, if you are displaying a chart with unfamiliar data, be sure to take time and explain what is happening in the visual and how it relates to what you are saying. You should never use sensitive, offensive, violent, or graphic visuals in any form. On this point, we will talk about effective communication. Why is it important? What are its characteristics? And how can we be an effective communicator? Effective communication is important, for it is a key interpersonal skill, and by learning how you can improve your communication has many benefits. Some of these are building trust, preventing or resolving problems, providing clarity and direction, creating better relationships, increasing engagement, improving productivity, and promoting team building. In effective communication, it sounds so simple. Say what you mean. But all too often, what you try to communicate gets lost in translation despite your best intentions. This translation happens in the communication cycle. Check this out.
Today we're going to talk about the communication cycle, specifically the 8 different components that make it up. Sure, you may not have heard of the communication cycle before, but some of these components are going to seem pretty familiar. To begin, we always start with the sender, who has some kind of idea that he is trying to get to a receiver. So that begs the question, how does an idea get from the sender to the receiver? Well, that idea represents the third component in the communication cycle, and that is the message, the idea being communicated. And for our sender here, well, he has a very specific idea in mind. He is in love, and he can't wait to communicate it. So now we arrive at our fourth component, which is the encoding phase. To encode is simply to package the message. And you really only have 3 different options. They are either verbal, nonverbal, or both. Our sender has decided that a love letter would be the best way to encode his message. This brings us to our 5th component, and that is the channel, which is simply defined as how the receiver takes in the message. Human beings have 5 channels. Think, what else do you have 5 of? If you guessed your 5 senses, you'd be right. Hearing, seeing, and feeling are the primary ways in which human beings take in information. And in this case, if it's a love letter, she will be using sight. Having taken in this message, she now needs to make sense of it. And another word for that is our next component, and that is to decode it. So if encoding is packaging your message, decoding is making sense of it. So, she's unpackaged the message. Now all we do is wait for her response. What do you think? Will she be into him? Okay, it looks like she is. And that response that she's giving right there, that's our next component. And that is the feedback loop. Any response the receiver gives to the sender. So there you have it, one effective cycle of communication. But wait, we're forgetting our final element, and that is noise, which is simply defined as anything complicating a message being sent or received. So if our sender has bad handwriting, our receiver can no longer decode his message. This, of course, alters her response, and therein changes the feedback. So in the end, it seems miscommunication is just as much a part of this cycle. Thanks for watching.
Moving forward, effective communication is done effectively only when information is transmitted without changing both the content and the context of the message. Effective communication is dependent on how rich those ideas are and how much of those ideas are retained in the process. When we say content, it is shown by the elements or topics in the message, while context refers to the underlying meaning and surrounding details of the message. Content and context should be a mirror of each other, meaning what you say in your content should be reflecting in the underlying meaning or the details of your message. The first concept of effective communication is message richness, or the message content, and the way the sender and receiver are able to connect. Richness is highly related to the emotional nature of humans. In essence, the greater the degree of richness, the greater the emotional connection to the message. That means we need to tap a certain emotion on our audience. To determine how much of those ideas are retained in the process, we need to have feedback from the receiver. For a person to be an effective communicator, a number of skills have to be utilized. Which skill one chooses greatly varies and is dictated by the situation, the content, or the actual information a person needs or wants to convey, and the intended recipient of that information. Let's take, for example, online classes. The skills needed in delivering message in this setup is different to face-to-face learning. As you know, the conduct of online classes is dictated by the situation, which is the emergence of COVID-19. Thus, each of us adapt to this situation. Apart from knowing the skills to be an effective communicator, it's also important to make an audience analysis, for it is a key element in effective communication. Audience here does not only refer to the people listening to you in a public speech, rather, it refers to anyone who is expected to receive the message you are sending. Knowing the audience, understanding their level, and how they need to receive the information are extremely important in packaging the message and sending it across. Audience analysis is therefore one skill an effective communicator must have.
Oh, hi. Wait a minute. Who are you?
It is imperative that you find out who the audience is, who will actually receive your message, and what they need to know. Only in doing so you can properly adjust all the other elements of communication, such as your words or registers, your tone, and your expressions. Another aspect that needs concentration in analyzing the audience is identifying and trying to overcome possible communication barriers. These are not confined to physical noise and physiological issues, but could also include cultural difference, varying levels of expectations and experiences, and difference in perspectives and communication style. Anyone might experience one or all these barriers at any given circumstance, and that such barriers exist has to be recognized so that anyone who is trying to communicate can adjust and apply the proper tools and strategies to remove those barriers that prevent the message from getting across. Effective communication requires a certain level of connection between and among people, allowing a series of exchanges of thoughts and emotions, eventually leading to mutual understanding. In order for that to happen, the following principles must be observed. Clarity, which pertains to both the message and the purpose why the message has to be sent. The message should be clear by using appropriate language and communication channels. But equally important is that the reason for sending and receiving the message must be understood by both the receiver and sender. Conciseness, the message should be as brief as may be required depending on one's purpose, especially in most modern contexts in the business and academic fields where time is of the essence. It should be devoid of trivial details that would hinder communication. Completeness. Despite its conciseness, the message should still be complete and accurate. Whenever necessary, background information should be given to provide better context. Facts and observations may also be helpful. Organization. Effective communication is usually planned in order to ensure the systematic flow of ideas and transition from one point to another. There are instances when communication is impromptu, but this should not be an excuse for an organized presentation of ideas. Empathy. The sender of the message should be sensitive to the needs and interests of the receiver. In case of face-to-face communication, the speaker must always be conscious of the reaction of the listener and adjust his or her communication strategy accordingly. Flexibility. Different people have different communication styles and consequently different expectations. Effective communicators know how to adapt to the varying needs and expectations of their audience and modify the message or the way the message is sent to avoid misunderstanding or misinterpretation. Let's take for example these comic strips. As you can see, the mentioned principles were not observed, which results to miscommunication or misunderstanding. On the first strip, principles of clarity, conciseness, completeness, and organization were not followed. while the second role lacks the principle of empathy. And on the last strip, the speaker does not manifest flexibility. On this part, we will talk about communication and globalization. The notion of the world being a global village has been a hot topic ever since the idea was brought up, especially in the light of rapid advances in technology and digitalization. Globalization has been regarded as the key to the worldwide integration of humanity, where there is an increased economic, political, and cultural integration and interdependence of diverse cultures. In Southeast Asia, for example, the Asian integration has been a buzzword among social communities, opening a wide array of discussion for future collaborations. For our part, we Filipinos have increased our awareness and acceptance of the notion that we belong to a diverse global community. This is not confined to communication with people from other cultures, but is inclusive of communication within our own societies, even with the minorities and the indigenous people. It is therefore imperative that we learn to communicate effectively with people regardless of age, gender, race, ability, religion, sexual orientation, income, marital status, or ethnicity. Communication in the modern world must be anchored on the concept of diversity, since effective communication and the ability to understand cultural differences are skills that have become requisites, not only for a meaningful social life, but also for a successful professional career. Even professionals from the countries that are traditionally known for sticking to their native tongue, an example, Japan, Korea, and Vietnam, have started to learn English as the internationally recognized lingua franca, with the concept that learning English does not make them less Japanese, Koreans, or Viets. In addition, digital technology has erased territorial boundaries among countries and among people with varying cultures. The notion of being a stranger has been revolutionized as the people whom we used to treat as strangers are now our co-workers, classmates, or friends, albeit some only in social media. Hence, there is a need to develop graduates and professionals who are multiculturalists, or those who are engaged with and respectful of people with different cultures. These are not necessarily people from other cultures all the time, since a country may have varying subcultures among its general society. In the Philippines, for example, there is no argument that people from Southern Tagalog have a different culture from the Bicolanos, and those from Zamboanga have different norms and beliefs from the Ilocanos. If you are prepared to welcome opportunity of communicating and interacting with people from different cultures, learning to communicate and interact with people from different cultures is a very important aspect in one's personal life or professional careers, since avoiding intercultural communication is virtually inevitable in any organization. This is especially true in business organizations, when products can go global and the manner by which any product is communicated to the global market can make or break the brand. Here are a few examples of business miscommunication in a global setting. In the past, Gerber dealt with issues in some cultures where women have low literacy rates, such as Africa and the Middle East. The women in these cultures generally use pictures to tell them what food they are buying. When Gerber started selling their product in these countries, the women saw the picture of the baby and believed that there was a baby or part of the baby in the jar. Irish Mist is a brown whiskey produced in Dublin, Ireland. In Germany, however, Mist literally translates to crap. Odette and Yoni is a brand of skin product. However, Yoni means uterus or vagina in Sanskrit and is an Indian representation of female genitalia, especially pertaining to the Hindu goddess Shakti. Undoubtedly, Globalization has affected the way people and companies communicate with each other. In some cases, cultural differences have accentuated cultural insensitivity, which is most felt in the business world. Since everyone is a consumer of particular business products, it is important to know the issues, etiquette, protocol, communication styles, and negotiation approaches of people from different cultures using the business experience as example. Here are some instances where lack of cultural or linguistic sensitivity in global communication severely affected companies or products. McDonald's spent thousands on a new TV ad to target Chinese consumers. This featured a Chinese man kneeling before a McDonald's vendor and begging him to accept his expired discount coupon. The ad caused uproar over the fact that begging is considered a shameful act in Chinese culture. Similarly, McDonald's also unintentionally offended thousands of Muslims when it printed an excerpt from the Quran on its throwaway hamburger bags. Muslims saw this as sacrilegious. Some staff at the African port of Stevedores saw the supposedly internationally recognized symbol for fragile, which is the broken glass, since in their culture, they treat the pictures printed on the packages to be representation of what's inside. They thought that it was a box of broken glass, and threw all the boxes into the sea. The film Hollywood Buddha caused outrage and protests on the streets of Sri Lanka, Malaysia, and Myanmar when the designer of the film's poster decided to show the lead actor sitting on the Buddha's head, which is an act of clear degradation against something holy. Coors Beer once had its slogan, "Turn it loose," translated to Spanish, but it became to mean suffer from diarrhea. All of these examples are predominantly business-related, where companies failed to regard cultural differences in packaging and communicating their product to the global market. However, the cause of cultural insensitivity in global communication can be felt in everyday communication, as cultural misunderstandings often lead to misinterpretation and unnecessary tension between people. Here are some examples. Showing the sole of a shoe by crossing one's legs and pointing one's shoes to the speaker. It means nothing to observers in most Western and Asian cultures. In Muslim culture, however, the gesture is perceived as insulting. Similarly, crossing one's legs while seated is customary for Westerners, but this is a social faux pas in Korea. Blinking rapidly while another person is talking is normal for most people, especially during tense situations. But for Taiwanese, this is considered impolite. Lastly, the Japanese view the business card as an extension of their body, while Americans view it simply as a business formality. Hence, when Japanese hand over their business cards with two hands and with great care, they get insulted when the person receiving just put it away with haste. These are just some of the instances where miscommunication and misunderstanding can happen as a result of cultural ignorance and insensitivity in the global environment. In order to develop more meaningful relationships and establish productive interaction with people having different cultures, everyone should recognize and respond to such differences and nuances. In addition, people have to be mindful that not everyone from the same culture exhibits the same characteristics and habits in communication. So, sensitivity is key to any successful communicative situation. Let's now move to ethics in communication. Effective communication is ethical communication. Communication is ethical only when it is genuine, open, cooperative, and sensitive to one's cultural and social beliefs and practices. If there is an intent to conceal the truth or bring damage to any organization, group, or individual person, communication is considered unethical, even in situations when there is no intent to harm, but damage to a certain group is inevitable because of the message or the channel used to relay the message. It is still considered unethical. For us to avoid unethical communication, here are the considerations. Number 1. Avoid prejudice. Most people bring their past experiences into a communication situation. Sometimes they pitch in existing information because they learned in the past that adding information makes the communication more successful. There are times when they do not contribute anything because of a possible past experience, when their input were not considered or valued. In any case, people enter into a communicative situation with certain expectations, and they behave or react accordingly. Past experiences inevitably affect people's communication styles in the future. When their audience responded positively to their message, chances of them repeating the same style are relatively high. However, when they were turned down or given negative feedback, this will definitely influence how they deliver the message next time. Prejudice, on the other hand, when people take their past experiences and make certain assumptions that the same experience will happen with the same people given the same context. Prejudice may be attributed to culture or personal preferences. Not all prejudice have a negative characteristic, as a person might consider all members of a group to be smart even without meeting them individually. It must be noted, however, that effective communicators should avoid prejudice because it influences communication even before it begins. Prejudice happens when people isolate an experience with one type of person or one group of people, then behave as if all encounters with people of the same type, or at least with the same characteristics, will lead to the same experiences. This eliminates a person's personal identity and individuality. There can be prejudice as regards to age, gender orientation, religious belief, race, socioeconomic status, and physical conditions. Effective communicators view people as separate from any preconceived notions others may have about them. They see the value of the individual as a person of worth, and thus we respect that individuality. Second, showing commitment and genuine interest. A key component of ethical communication is showing commitment in the communicative situation. Being committed means giving sufficient time and resources to any discussion or conversation, and being open about any issue that may arise. Commitment also involves volunteering important information, even if it puts a person's own short-term interests at risk, as long as it is for the benefit of the majority, especially in the long run. Encouraging a communicative environment of trust can go a long way in promoting ethical communication in an academic or business setting. To show commitment and genuine interest in face-to-face conversation, we have the so-called belly button psyche. The belly button rule means the direction of a person's navel reflects his or her true interest. When people are interested in you and what you have to say, they will point their belly button squarely at you as you talk. That shows they are engaged and they are focused on what you have to say. Although we do this without thinking, the fact is that we can consider this rule when we are having conversation with people who are special to us. Third, respecting sociocultural beliefs and practices of others. The concept of globalization is not new, but people somehow fail to realize that this is not confined to technology or bridging the world and making it a virtual community. Globalization also entails changing the way people communicate to others, especially those with different norms, cultures, and belief systems. This involves all types of communication, whether face-to-face, chatting via email, or using various forms of mass media. Ethical communication requires people to respect socio-cultural beliefs and practices of others, while at the same time avoiding all kinds of stereotypes.